911 operator Harris, where is your emergency?
I don't know what's happening. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
Breonna Taylor. Back in March, she was shot 8 times while she slept in her bed in Louisville. The protesters across this country demanding, say her name.
Tensions are still high as protests continue in the River City.
Too often, there is silence when Black women are killed by law enforcement.
Fundamentally, we know, as Black women have been telling us for generations, that none of us are free until all of us are free.
What is the crime you think they're guilty of?
Murder.
Where was she shot at?
I don't know. She's on the grill right now. I don't know.
You know, ban no-knock warrants, ban chokeholds, and end qualified immunity.
Breonna Taylor's case gives us an opportunity to really ask these deep questions that we need to ask about policing.
A lot of the women who have experienced some of the police violence, their names have been lost in this shuffle.
You know what? I'm known as this conscious artist. I'm doing some things, but I can do more.
And here we are fighting against a justice system that can't even identify her or give her enough light of day.
Because until and unless we have enough bravery and courage to be fully imaginative about what the future can be, we're not going to get to the world that's possible.
I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. Those words are by Dr. Angela Davis, and they are applicable and resonant today. On March 13th, 2020, 26-year-old Breonna Taylor was murdered in her own home by Louisville police after being shot at least 8 times after the officers forced entry with a battering ram. More than 3 months later, and the officers responsible for her death still walk the streets as free men. While the country is in the streets demanding justice for George Floyd and so many others who have been killed by police, we must also call for justice for Breonna Taylor right now. Too often, there is silence when Black women are killed by law enforcement or killed in general. Like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor was killed by the police, but her case remains largely disconnected from the larger narrative. We must speak up and speak out until justice is served. Together, we will not be ignored. We're ready to jump into a conversation with some of the leading leaders, activists, thought leaders, professors, etc., to really get a handle of what is going on with this case. Why can we not get justice for Breonna Taylor? And what can each of us do right now to move this agenda forward? So welcome you all. I want to just talk really quickly about, in this current moment, there's so much going on around us, like COVID-19, the economic crisis that we're driving into similarly like a battle ram. Brittany, if we could start with you, if you could talk to us a little bit about why it's so important to lift up Breonna Taylor's case.
This is such an important conversation. Breonna Taylor was an essential worker. A person who is part of the class of people that we have come to understand is so important in this moment of a global pandemic. And yet she was killed in her bed while sleeping one night by the police. And her killers have not been brought to justice. That is unacceptable. And when we have the clarity that we have at the killing of Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or George Floyd, of all of these Black folks who have been killed by the police, we also have to have that level of clarity about what's happening with Breonna Taylor. And we've also got to use this as an opportunity to think about these policies that have terrorized our communities. This policy of busting into homes with these no-knock warrants and using battering rams to terrorize folks and then killing them because they don't have the expected response to being upended in the middle of the night. Breonna Taylor's case gives us an opportunity to really ask these deep questions that we need to ask about policing, but it also reminds us that Black politics has to include and center Black women, and that's Black cisgender women and Black transgender women. If not, then we're not having a complete conversation about Black women.
Absolutely. Brittany, Packnett, Cunningham, talk to us a little bit more about why in this current moment we have to keep our eyes on Breonna Taylor's case. And if you could also talk a little bit about some of the policies and practices that actually led to Breonna Taylor being murdered in her bed by law enforcement.
So this case is critically important for all of the reasons that my namesake, Dr. Cooper, already laid out. But fundamentally, we know, as Black women have been telling us for generations, that none of us are free until all of us are free. So freedom and liberation that only includes Black men or Black cisgender folks is not liberation at all. And if we are going to have a conversation about all of the violence that begets our communities, including police violence, then we have to make sure we're clear about how it affects Black women. It most certainly affected Breonna Taylor when she was killed in her bed. It also affects a number of Black women in terms of the sexual violence that they experience at the hands of police. We also recognize that there are so many of our folks, our Black women, both cis and trans, who are essential workers just like Breonna and are experiencing the violence of poverty and wage theft every single day in this country, even more so during coronavirus. I could go on and on and on about all of the ways in which injustices are exacerbated if you are a person who identifies as a woman. That list is never ending, it seems. And so very clearly, we don't get to freedom if we get there without the women. Black women have been the backbone of freedom work. We wouldn't have pride if it weren't for Black trans women. We have to recognize that if we can hold up the movement, then we can be at the center of the conversation too, and we must be. Specifically about this case, you know, it's interesting. As you were saying, Alicia, there's so much going on. We are dealing with news that is constant and frustrating, outrage that is constant and justified, and we're in the middle of a pandemic that is rendering so many of us confused, unable to pay bills, and more. So in the midst of all of that, it's been difficult for these stories to break out in the first place. And you add on to the fact that there is no footage of this, because we know that so often, in order for America to finally care about Black lives, they have to continue to see the pornography and carnage of Black death. There's no video of Breonna's killing, and she is a Black woman. So there were multiple things working against this story actually entering the mainstream. As somebody who works on police violence and racial justice literally every single day of my life, it still took me 2 months to know about the story of Breonna Taylor when somebody finally sent it to me. And that is not because people weren't working. Local activists, BLM Louisville, her family, the ACLU, so many others in Kentucky were working to try to raise her name to the national level. When I finally found out about the story, I was co-hosting a podcast at the time, and I said, this is precisely the space where we can have this conversation. And finally, we were able collectively to get her name trending nationally. And we've seen a great deal of activity over the last month or so because people are finally getting the word out about who she is and what happened to her because of what was locally happening on the ground and the organizing there. Some of that organizing has also resulted, to your question, in addressing the policies that brought us to this place in the first place. We know that Breonna's law was passed at the state level, pushed by her family and by local activists to help rein in what no-knock warrants are. The fact that somebody can enter your home without announcing themselves, without ever having to turn on any kind of camera to hold themselves accountable is and should be completely unconstitutional in this country. And yet, that is why Breonna is dead. Her boyfriend thought that those were robbers, and he called 911 because he didn't realize it was in fact 911 at the door. So the idea that someone could enter your home for whatever reason they make up, and that those people are the folks who are paid to serve and protect us is absolutely unacceptable. So policies like those and so many others need to be rendered null and void in this country so that we can avoid having any other Breonnas.
Absolutely. Congresswoman Pressley, I want to bring you into this conversation because one of the things that feels so important here is for people to know that so much of these laws, so many of these laws are really able to be impacted at the state and local level, but there is still a role for the federal government, and there is still a role for leadership coming from the federal level. You've been very vocal about both the leadership that we need and the leadership that is absent in this moment. When it comes to Breonna Taylor's case, what kind of leadership do you think we need to see at the federal level, and who should we see it from? Do you think we're getting that kind of leadership right now?
What's been so frustrating about the lives of people being reduced to a hashtag is that the tragic and unjust and brutal way in which they died, were lynched, were murdered, that is what is trending. And that is how they are defined and characterized in our minds, when they should be trending for their contributions, for their genius, for their service, for who they were in community, who they were to their family. And in the midst of COVID-19, when people are just getting the memo that essential workers are essential, even though we have treated them as if they are disposable, the fact that we have had to organize for just basic rights. But I want to also caution us, even in that frame of essential worker, because that still defines the value based on the utility of the role that you play, of the labor that you render. Breonna Taylor was an essential worker, but more than that, her life was essential, who she was to her family. And so I think that's just an important thing, and I appreciate that being brought into the space early on. And despite the fact that Black women, that we have been the truth tellers, the table shakers, the disruptors, the preservers of democracy, the most reliably voting constituency, we are rendered invisible, and we are hidden figures, both in our contributions, but also in our trauma. So we are hidden figures in history, we are hidden survivors, we are hidden victims, and very often within our community in public and in private, our home community with Black folks, you know, I remember running for city council and saying, I'm running to save girls that don't even know they need saving. And not only did people tell me to go and run a nonprofit and that was not the work of government, which I knew better. I knew that we were failing our girls. But that is because of the false binary choices often put before us when it comes to lawmaking and when it comes to budget. So every time we spoke about the disproportionate hate, hurt, and harm foisted onto Black folks, codified through lawmaking, people only spoke about Black boys and men and not Black girls and women growing up in the same oppressive structures and conditions. And so that persists and is pervasive in every single way. And Representative Omar and I often talk about how we needn't be participating in the oppression Olympics. You know, our freedoms and our destinies are tied. So it's not a matter of, are you your brother's keeper or are you your sister's keeper? This is not or, it's and. But bell hooks reminds us that very often when we are talking about Black people, the focus is on Black men. And when we're talking about women, the focus is on white women. So we have to say Breonna's name. We have to center the value of her life while also acknowledging the contradiction in that she worked to save lives. And then because of no-knock warrants and the fact that our Black skin means that to most we will never appear unarmed, her life was violently taken, although she was a preserver of life. And so if no-knock warrant, Breonna Taylor would still be here. So that was included to your point, let's hear around the federal role in the Justice and Policing Act. But we need to go further. The fact that, you know, banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants was included means that George Floyd would still be alive. Breonna Taylor would still be alive. And that's true justice. We can never deliver justice to those families because they would still be here. There, however, must be accountability. And that is why I've introduced with Representative Justin Amash the End Qualified Immunity Act. This statute, these protections for law enforcement, has allowed them to operate with callous impunity and disregard for human life, for Black lives, without retribution or consequences. So there can never be justice, but there must be accountability. And that will not exist until we end qualified immunity. You know, if doctors are violate you, there's medical malpractice. If a lawyer, you know, there's negligence. There's nothing. So yes, if a chief of police resigns, you know, good. because of a failure, because of the excessive force and militarization of your force, we send them into our communities with military grade equipment. And there's veterans preference. So why wouldn't they go into communities as if they are in battle? So we have to stop the militarization of our police force. That means stop the transference of military grade equipment to our police forces. You know, ban no-knock warrants, ban chokeholds, and end qualified immunity so that there can be accountability.
That was important and incredible. Congresswoman, we know that you need to vote and we need you to lead.
Yes, so I gotta vote. I gotta work on another issue. It's about a tsunami of hurt for Black women, a eviction crisis on the horizon. And so I've gotta go and deal with that. But thank you all. Appreciate you. I honor you. And we'll be together again. Say her name.
Thank you.
Breonna Taylor, love you back.
Speaking of say her name, Dr. Cooper, I would like to turn to you now and talk with you a little bit about how and why the Say Her Name movement was started. And, you know, you and I have known each other since the very beginning of the Black Lives Matter, you know, and we've talked about this, right? We've talked about the ways in which Black becomes synonymous with Black men, and that often comes at the expense of Black women, Black girls, and Black folks across the gender spectrum. We agree with Congresswoman Pressley, it doesn't have to be an either or, but if you could talk to us a little bit more about how the Say Her Name movement became necessary and why it's so critical to the larger movement for Black lives.
One of the things that we need to know in the context of Say Her Name, and this is a very brief personal story that I want to tell that's really relevant to this. When we do this work and pass Breonna's law and bring these men to justice who have killed her, we are creating a context for Black communities more generally to be safe. And that is what we gain when we focus on what happens with Black women and not just when we have a liberation project that's only about Black men. Less than 24 hours before Breonna Taylor was murdered in her bed, the local police in my hometown in Louisiana used a no-knock warrant on my home, on my childhood home, because I have a cousin who lives there who struggles with addiction. The police used that context. And so the home that my mother purchased when I was 8 years old, and that she spent most of her life paying for, they blasted a hole through the door. They broke out the windows. They terrorized the community at 6 a.m. to deal with what are addiction issues, which is a public health crisis when we talk about white folks, but which becomes a moment of criminality when we talk about Black people. And I want to say that because when we are in these conversations, people think that we are talking heads talking about what happens to other people and not talking about the conditions that we live in. And folks also think that when we have degrees and qualifications and when we're leaders, that these issues don't show up at our own doorstep. But literally on March the 12th, this was the call that I got from my mother about the cops terrorizing a community several states away. In the aftermath of Mike Brown being killed, we were still primarily talking about all of these Black men who had been killed in 2014. John Crawford and Eric Garner had been killed in the weeks prior to Mike Brown, and then many other Black men had been killed in the aftermath. And Kimberly Crenshaw, who invented the term intersectionality, began to push us to name the Black women who had been killed. And so we began to talk about 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley Jones, and we began to talk about Rekia Boyd, right? And we began to talk the summer of 2015, Sandra Bland was accosted by police and ended up dead. However, we think that that might have happened, certainly as a result of state violence. And so we began to have conversations. Maya Hall is a trans Black woman who was killed around the same time by police as well. And all of those women were absent of the conversation. They were not drivers of the conversation. And so Kimberly Crenshaw asked us to remember that state violence also harms Black women, that the police also kill Black women too. And then Black Youth Project used digital tools to amplify that campaign. And so now when we're in the streets, part of the argument that we're trying to make when we say her name, and when we try to become more gender inclusive and say their names, is to say that Black men can't be at the center of this narrative. And here's why that conversation is really important in our community. Because all of us know that our brothers get killed, our sons get killed. So many Black women talk about the fear that they have when Black men leave the house, Black men who are important to them. But we are not talking about liberation if we're not talking about what happens to Black women and girls, right? And then part of the challenge is you're not going. So this is the question I always ask when I'm with Black women. We out here for marching for our brothers. Anytime they get killed, we are like, we got to leave the house, even in the middle of a pandemic. But what I want is a world, that when we do get killed, brothers are like, we've got to march for our sisters. We got to leave this house and we got to create a context where our sisters don't get killed. And they also got to be inclusive and say our Black trans sisters as well. And unfortunately, even in the case of Breonna Taylor, I know local activists were working hard on her behalf. But the fact that when George Floyd was killed, we were like, screw this pandemic, we leaving the house. And when Breonna Taylor was killed in the middle of a pandemic, folks are like, we are constrained by this pandemic with what we can do. That's the difference, that we cannot abide viscerally the killing of Black men. And then with Black women, we think it's sad, we think it's enraging, but we don't think of it as a thing that we cannot abide. So Say Her Name keeps on raising our consciousness and saying that Black political energy has to be committed to all Black lives, Black trans lives, Black queer lives, Black women's lives, the lives of Black disabled folks, or else what are we fighting for? What is this liberation project about, right?
Here's what I want to know. What does a world look like where Black women matter?
It's such a simple question. And frankly, I think we're tempted to make the answer more complicated than it needs to be. A world where Black women matter is a world where we can live and live freely, where we are not killed and the genius inside of us is also not killed, right? Where we are able to be full human beings, happy, sad, joyful, frustrated, angry, excited, all of those things that other people are allowed to be every single day. And where we can do where we have done the kind of healing work amongst ourselves, amongst one another, amongst the Black community to make sure that when it comes time to stand up for one another, that as Dr. Cooper said, we're all doing that for one another. I'm thinking about our sister Layleen Polanco, who was found dead in Rikers Island, a Black trans woman, Afro-Latinx. And here we are in several months later after her death with new video that has surfaced that said what the Black trans community has been saying all along, that her death was preventable. And clearly what abolitionists have been saying all along, that the death was preventable because the carceral state as it exists doesn't actually need to exist. So really, when we're talking about a world where Black women's lives matter, it is a world where the systems and structures and culture that we interact with and that interact with us all the time are actually built with us in mind, are actually functioning so that we can function highly, are actually giving us healthy communities from the ground up instead of over-policing and punishing us from the top down. The truth of the matter is there is a precedent for abolition in this country. We, all three of us, and Congresswoman Pressley included, we are direct beneficiaries of that dream, of that imagination, of that struggle. And so the fact that we are here means that we have a responsibility to make the world more free than how we found it. What that means fully is actually dreaming big enough and broadly enough to say the systems that we have always known don't have to be the systems that we accept. We continue to see policing introduce violence into our communities that wasn't there without it. So how about we actually take the money that is in those systems and put it into the places that we know work? Better schools, better housing, livable wages, strong mental and physical health care, and ensuring that all of the folks who live in our communities that are our neighbors and are essential, whether or not they are EMTs like Breonna was, are actually engaging and experiencing the kind of community that everyone deserves and that wealthy people across town already get, right? So a world where Black women matter is a world, cis and trans, is a world where everyone is experiencing justice all the time. I had a friend of mine, Nala Toussaint, who is a Black trans woman, a brilliant activist and organizer, a seminary student, theologian. She said to me something that I have been thinking about nonstop. She said, I think sometimes people need a place to put their trauma. And at the bottom of the ladder is Black trans women. So all of that trauma will fall to Black women and Black trans women while we are holding everybody else up on our shoulders. And I literally cannot stop thinking about that. So the answer to your question, a world where Black women matter, is a world where we're not even standing on that ladder because we don't need to push other people down to put ourselves up. we're making sure that we're not depositing our trauma on somebody else, but we're actually engaging in the radical imagination, dreaming, and struggle that it takes to make sure that we experience justice every single day. Because as Dr. West says, that is what love looks like in public.
I love that. So, Dr. Cooper, let me come back to you. You know, you and I have both heard that, people might say things like, well, sure, I see you all are trying to move the feminist agenda forward, but we don't have time for that right now because we're trying to get free. Let's get free, and then we'll deal with the feminist agenda. I think you know how I feel about that, but I would like to hear from you whether you think that there is liberation possible for Black people and of Black people without the liberation of Black women.
I can't stand it when folks are like, because gender is a distraction. Because here's the thing. Black women aren't a distraction when they come in to bail you out of jail. Black women aren't a distraction when they plan in the protests. Black women aren't a distraction when they cooking the meals. They aren't a distraction when they are putting together the bail fund. We are only a distraction when we ask for our concerns to be put on the agenda, and that is a lie, and it is a white supremacist capitalist lie, and it is a lie that comes from a politics of scarcity. So we love to talk about the magnifying, amplifying power of Black people when we get in the streets and we make some stuff happen, and then we try to tell Black women that there's not enough political energy to go around, and we have to resist that, right? Because the world that we live in, everything that is good about Black people, I guarantee you that if you look close enough, a Black woman built it, a Black queer person built it, a Black disabled person built it, right? We have built the community institutions that have sustained us when white folks wouldn't let us into their schools, wouldn't let us into their hospitals, right? Didn't have any modes of protection for us. When our people are houseless, it's sisters who are cooking meals. It is sisters who are sustaining the spiritual life of communities, whether through mosque or whether at church or wherever we are doing it. So how do we continue to think that we're going to be liberated and free when our freedom vision is So here's the thing. Black women's freedom vision is not about what white folks say. The challenge, I'm always direct with brothers, for many brothers, their notion of freedom is the freedom to do what white people do, to lead how white people lead, to have money like white people have it, and to run the world like white people have run it. That is not Black people's freedom, Black women's freedom vision, right? Because white freedom is about domination, it's about scarcity, it's about competition, and you can only secure and procure all of those things through violence. And too many brothers want the freedom to move around in the world like white men, and Black women are talking about an entirely different imaginary. We are talking about a world, as Brittany describes, where everybody gets to eat, where we're not throwing our trauma on each other, where we don't understand our ability to make it in the world as everybody on one ladder, just trying to come up or clawing other people off. But we live in a world of abundance where everybody gets to articulate their needs, be heard, and have structures and mechanisms for those needs to be taken care of. That isn't a white supremacist project. That's a Black women's, Black queer liberation project. And we need to own that and we need to name that. And because here's the thing, if we don't, then what brothers are really saying is not that they want to be free, right? But really that they want to be closer to whiteness, that they want to be patriarchs, that they want to be able to dominate us and have access to a hierarchy of power. That isn't freedom. And it will do the same thing to them that this unchecked level of access to power has done to white folks. It will make them ideologically a people given to violence, given to kinds of structural depravity that continue to take our breath away, right? And it is not the things that Black men sacrifice. Power is not freedom. Power is a mechanism to help us get free. But if all they want is power, then they are not trying to get free. And if what Black men want when we fight in the streets for them is the power and freedom to put their boot on Black women's necks, particularly Black trans women's necks, then let me tell you something. That's not a liberation project I'm on board with. And that is the distraction. That is the distraction. That is the collusion. Black men trying to get what white men got. That is the distraction from the freedom project we are all fighting for. And that's why Black women are like, we fed up. We don't have time with that. Either for that, everybody get free or nobody get free. We all go together.
You know
and
what?
Can I add to that?
Yes, you can.
This is the point, right? That it is fundamentally about power. And the smog of white supremacy culture, white middle-class dominant culture that we all breathe in tells us, to Dr. Cooper's point, that power is scarce. That if I have it, I have to hoard it, protect it with my life, protect it with guns, like that couple we saw in my hometown of St. Louis did when peaceful protesters, nonviolent protesters came down their street. We have to protect it at all costs, because if I lose, if you have any power, that represents a loss of power for me. This is the same kind of conversation we saw happen in the world, to place an analogy on it, about healthcare. That suddenly, when a Black president had the audacity to say, more people should be able to go to the hospital, to the doctor, get preventative care, that won't put them in the poorhouse, that won't leave them destitute, that won't count them out because they have a pre-existing condition. And that wasn't even completely universal. But the conversation that was had was a conversation of threat for people who heard that, right? People suddenly heard, you have more access, you'll have more resources, you'll have more of your needs met, and therefore I will undoubtedly have less. Instead, operating in such a space where we share power instead of hoard power, because power is not a finite resource. It is abundant, right? I believe we are all born with certain innate powers and abilities and gifts and talents. And Dr. Cooper being one brilliant Brittany doesn't take away from me being another brilliant Brittany, right? And so we have to understand power as an abundant resource, that when we actually share it, all of us win. And we win in bottom line ways. We win in fundamental ways. We win when the folks who have the most brilliant ideas have the resources to get them out to the people. We win in ways when caregivers and frontline workers and healthcare workers can actually afford to feed their family so that they can treat you as well as they possibly can when you come in to see them. This is a net positive for everybody, for us to actually share this power. But the systems and culture that we have ingested for so long teach us that when you get a little bit of power, you got to hold on to it. Everybody else be damned. No matter what you have to do to protect said power, you're going to have to do it, because that's the end game, right? It is a zero-sum game, and I have to be a have so that I'm a have-not. I just wanted to double-click on Dr. Cooper's point, because that is everything. Power is everything. Everything we are talking about here is about whether or not we are willing to truly fundamentally share power.
I got two questions for both of you to answer as we wrap up this conversation. What we know is that Black women are not just out here fighting for other people, we are also fundamentally fighting for ourselves. That's just facts. And I think it would be important for people who are watching this conversation to hear, how can people better support, empower, and protect Black women who are fighting for justice for everybody in this current iteration of our movement? And then, Brittany, I would like you to also just talk about, how can people get involved in moving Breonna Taylor's case forward as a model for how it is that we address the rampant, not just disrespect, but the rampant taking of lives from Black women?
I think that part of what we've got to do is begin to think about all the Black girls who are around us, who we are conditioned to overlook. And we learned this lesson with Trayvon Martin because of the way that we treated Rachel Jontel, the way that our communities threw her away and did not ride for her after she experienced the trauma of bearing witness. And then there's Darnella Frazier, who we know so much about what happened with George Floyd, because this 17-year-old Black girl pleaded with these police officers and pulled out her camera and taped what is happening. So when we talk about what does it mean to care for Black women and girls, it literally means to begin to build the support systems to actually support Black girls in your community. To stop thinking that it's only Black boys who need mentoring programs, extra support, therapy, school interventions, protection, but really to begin to see Black girls as political actors, as thinkers, as valuable voices and members of community who also need protection and help and care and support. It means supporting Black women's organizing. It means that when Black women are on the mic or at the table trying to lead, that when you're at the table with them, you amplify their voices, right? You say, you know what, that sister had a great idea. Brothers, how can we support her? How can we help her? And it means really getting on board with pushing all that is happening with Breonna Taylor and making sure that that sister gets justice, or rather that her family gets justice, right? My marker of success is not, what do we do the next time a Black woman gets killed by the cops? That's a perverse marker of success. My marker of success is we want Black people to stop being killed by cops. And that means that we've got to get on board with an abolition agenda. We've got to defund police. We've also got to figure out how to have conversations about intracommunal violence that are not pathologizing Black people, but that are talking about how you begin to support. Because look, the challenge of conversations like this that always bubbles around the edges is that we know that most of the time it's not the cops killing Black women. Most of the time it's brothers doing the killing. And I don't know how we always say that in mixed company without making it seem like we think brothers are violent, terrible people. I don't think brothers are violent, terrible people. I think that the stress and pressures of capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy turn brothers into people sometimes that make them not great supporters, partners in struggle, and make it squeeze out a notion of healthy manhood so that brothers can't show up in community in the ways they otherwise would. And so when we listen to these young activists push us toward an abolitionist agenda, we've got to understand that when they're asking us to reimagine the world, they're not actually just talking to us about the police, but they are also asking us to talk about all the ways these systems infiltrate us and squeeze out the very best parts of ourselves and our ability to love each other the ways that we should. And so we've got to get on board with abolition, because as we open up space for ourselves, as we move the police out the way, for instance, then we open up a space to reimagine other modes of relating to each other that are not carceral, that are not rooted in punishment, and that are rooted in some kind of justice that is communally decided upon, but that is also rooted in our love and deep care and affection for each other. And the problem has been that the state has been the arbiter of so much of our anxiety and our struggle that we haven't been able to see each other. And so that for me is the world that I'm fighting for.
Ashe. I so appreciate you, Dr. Cooper. And that is also very true when it comes to the murders of Black trans women. It's not by police, right? It's about the ways in which we have not figured out how to deal with our desires and intimacy, right? And love in public. And so, yes, to all of the layers around patriarchy and white supremacy and capitalism and how it impacts our communities and shapes us in ways that don't allow us to be community. Thank you for that. Brittany, take us home.
To Breonna Taylor, there are 3 steps that I want everybody to take. The first thing I want you to do is to go to justiceforbreonna.org. You can also go to fightforbreonna.org. It will take you to the very same place. There are phone numbers to call, email addresses to write, action to take, petitions to sign, donations to make, because we have to make sure that the pressure is felt all across the state of Kentucky so that everyone from the district attorney to the police chief, the new police chief, to the mayor, all recognize that somebody will be held accountable for this, because Breonna did not take her own life. And we have to make sure that Black life is actually of such value that at the very least, you are going to honor us in death if you're not at least going to honor us in life. So that's the first thing. Go to fightforbreonna.org. Even if you've done it before, go again and take action once again. The second thing I want people to do is I want them to go to a site called actforblacktranslives.org. actforblacktranslives.org. What is put together there is a living document of actions to take and also places to go educate yourself, things to read, organizations to support, folks to follow, films to watch, so that you can graduate from being an aspiring ally to an aspiring co-conspirator of Black trans folks, that you can actually get in the way of the injustice that encounters that community so often, and that you can actually do so in such a way that was advised by Black trans women, but put together by those of us who are aspiring co-conspirators to say, here's our responsibility to that community to make sure we're not just shaking our heads as we got so frustrated that people did when it came to Breonna Taylor. So that's the second thing I want you to do. The third thing I want, so two clear actions, 2 websites, fightforbreonna.org, actforblacktranslives.org. This last thing I want you to do is I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to start writing down the world that you imagine beyond accountability. Beyond police officers getting arrested, beyond them getting convicted and going to jail, beyond the system of policing, beyond just Black women or Black trans women, but including Black disabled folks, Afro-Latinx folks, Black and Indigenous folks. I want you to sit down and actually go through the exercise of imagining what justice, true justice, not just accountability, what true justice in the world can look like. And put that piece of paper somewhere where you can consistently revisit it. Because when you go read something else, or you see somebody else's tweet, or you hear a podcast that sparks your thinking and widens your imagination, go back to that piece of paper, cross out the small thing and write something bigger. Because until and unless we have enough bravery and courage to be fully imaginative about what the future can be, and then going and actually making it happen, we're not going to get to the world that's possible. So go to fightforbrianna.org, go to actforblacktranslives.org, and start imagining what is radically possible for the future.
This was incredible. Thank you, Dr. Brittney Cooper. Thank you, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. And thank you, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, for joining us in an incredible conversation about how we not only say her name, but how it is that we make justice real. Thank you both so much.
Well, as many of us have seen recently, there's been a lot of conversation in this country about police brutality, racial reconciliation, systematic racism. We're experiencing a number of conversations. But what we don't want to get lost in this is some of the people who have lost their lives in this fight for equality as we continue to fight oppression. And usually what tends to happen in these cases is a lot of the women who have experienced some of the police violence that has commonly and more commonly been associated with Black men, that their names have been lost in this shuffle. And so in March of this year, Breonna Taylor was killed by Louisville police, shot 8 times in her own home while sleeping. And it's a case that has gained certainly national attention, but between George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and other cases, there is a real fear and concern that people will forget to say her name, being Breonna Taylor. So I'm pleased to welcome 2 people who are at the forefront of making sure that her name and the fight in pursuit of justice remains steadfast. Kyrie Irving, a 6-time NBA All-Star, currently with the Brooklyn Nets, and also Common, who is an actor, an activist, an author. All the A's, you got all the A's coming, I feel like, and also an award winner to throw that other A on there. Gentlemen, I want to ask both of you, and Kyrie, I'll start with you. Why is it important that we continue to uplift and draw attention to what happened to Breonna Taylor?
First off, I want to send condolences and prayers out to her family, and watching her mom go out and be accessible to all these shows and really speaking on things that I can only imagine how hard it is, especially to lose a daughter, friends. And it's a very sensitive time, and it is very important to speak out on behalf of all our Black queens. It's my responsibility to be an acknowledgement of all the things that I can do to elevate what's happening and how I can make change, whether that is utilizing my voice or whether that is being there and being present. But it's very important for me because I have a young daughter. She's 4 years old. I'm raising her in this climate in society right now. And to hear news like this that's going on, and females' names are getting lost in the shuffle. And there's this attitude out here that, hey, where are our men at? Where are our men at? And here we are, right here, front and center, front lines, because throughout history, our women have been front lines. They have been taking the brunt of psychological warfare that's been going on. And I could go deep into that, but in specifics about Breonna and her family, I just really want to shed the light and spread light to all those who want to join this fight for justice, because there still hasn't been justice. And I think we all stand in solidarity that we want to see justice and something be done in our criminal justice system that can help.
And Common, why was this important for you to continue to uplift Breonna Taylor?
In my plight and my mission to be the best human being I can be, and be the best of humanity, the best child of God, I always been doing my best to do for our people, for Black people, because we've always been like getting pushed down, like in some form or another. And as I continued this fight, I was working on this documentary at one point about writing a new story for Black America. It was part of this project I was doing called Black America Again. And I was sitting with this writer, his name is Michael Denzel Smith, and he said to me, man, as much as you fighting for black people, you got to make sure you're fighting for women. For me, if I didn't uplift the black women, I mean, I've done it in music and in my life, but if I didn't bring light to the injustices that go on with black women, I would be the same as the people who are overlooking our struggles overall. Like this, I would be basically contributing to the system. We got to be there to stand, like you said, front line, stand beside, stand in front when we need to, stand behind when we need to. We need to just be there for our black women. So that's why we, you know, it's important that we highlight and bring attention and action to Breonna Taylor's killing and many other women who I'm starting to learn their names.
Kyrie, you use the word erased, and Common, you use the word forgotten when it comes to, you know, why cases like Breonna Taylor in our community, while obviously many of us feel we feel those cases were wrong and that justice should be done, but it's not the same level of support that you may see, support or even anger or outrage as you may see with a George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or some of the other cases that we're familiar with. Common, what are your thoughts about how this erasure happens when it comes to black women?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think one of the things that we have to understand just overall with black women specifically, we haven't been able to, you know, people haven't seen video of it. So that's what's been charging America up more than anything is like, oh, people seen George Floyd get killed. Ahmaud Arbery wasn't even as much attention, and the world didn't go up in flames when he was killed. And from Breonna Taylor to him to Rekia, we all should have been going up in flames earlier than this. But it was the actual visual of seeing this human being being killed that really made people understand what it is. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what happens with us as people, until you see it and you're like, oh, this really exists. I got a chance to go down to Kentucky, and just to be around that family, I was like, man, this is somebody that they lost a loved one. She lost a daughter. This brother lost his woman, and he tried to fight for her. It was an uncle that lost his niece. And I'm saying, no matter whether we see the videos or not, we got to know that this is a life being taken, and this is a life that is valued.
What are your thoughts, Kyrie? Why do you think that it's been easier, for lack of a better way to put it, to erase the struggles that black women have had, or the way they also have been victimized by police brutality and police violence?
Well, at first, I think we need to identify some of the unlawful practices that happen, you know, within the police department, in terms of there's no body cams going in, you know, there's no checkbox of what does justice look like for Breonna in this case, and for people to follow up on it, until we have to go on Instagram, or we have to go on YouTube, or we have to be watching the news to understand that, I don't want to misspeak on her name, but Tamika Palmer, her mom, is in a very alone place, she says. And for me as a man, to hear that a black woman, a sister, is feeling alone and she doesn't feel the same support, and she's watching this George Floyd case take precedent all over the news. And then we have a campaign, Say Her Name, that has been in existence even before Breonna Taylor, that always shed light on it. And this is a case, I feel like, of we need to acknowledge a lot of the ignorance that still exists within our male brotherhood. Where are we to speak out against things that are going unjust against our women? And like Common said, he's absolutely right. It has been a target physically, mentally, spiritually on our black women. To have black men, to raise black men, to raise black daughters, to raise black women has taken years of that. So to hear Breonna's mom talk, it really put a different tone in my heart emotionally, to where I felt like I didn't know enough. And until I had to go back and do enough information digging, not just from emotional, angry place, because when you hear about the police killing a black woman, like, I'll be honest with you, I want to go out there and just, it resonates in a different place. And I want to direct it back to this. This is a great point to make of us finding solutions on how to be better moving forward, to bring more light to things like this, and to, I don't even want to say things, to human life. Our black women, they are literally spiritual goddesses that have birthed all of us 300,000 years ago. And here we are fighting against a justice system that can't even identify her or give her enough light of day to know that her name matters just as much as George Floyd. So for me, I want to change that and listen more to YouTube, others, and fight in the fight, so I can know where I can make my power be felt as well.
Think about how society treats the Black woman. It's like society just itself like treats the Black woman. First, it's the fight for racism. You know, like we fight against racism, and it's always thought from a male perspective, right? And then next is like women's liberation, but it's never thought of as the Black woman liberation, even though Black women have been leading it in many ways and have created liberation for Black men, women. I feel like it's our responsibility, me, Kyrie, it's our responsibility to be here like, hey, this is where we are. We here to provide, protect, cultivate, nurture, listen, help create, co-create, whatever the things that we need to do as we communicate with our sisters. Whatever we need to do, we want to be here for that.
Well, Kyrie mentioned something that is important, and I think it's a struggle for our community to have an honest conversation about misogyny, about gender imbalance within our own community. Why does that conversation seem to be so difficult? I wonder, what are your thoughts on that, Kyrie?
Just need love. Us as men, where we come from our women, and I think that I've had a very unique journey, losing two of my grandmothers, my mom, and the strength of my family did come from a male perspective. I did have my sister who was the balance between all of that, and then my little sister now. But the love of really understanding where you stand within your own community, never turning your back to find out who you are from anyone else. You're Black queens that tell you real quick who you are, that remind you real quick with some truth, honest answers, and that's all I want. As a Black man here living in society, I have been experiencing the other side, so to say, of what, kind of adjusting and assimilating or adapting more or less to, the white world, as people like to call it. But I see the human condition specifically in our community of these conversations are even harder than we like to admit. As a man sitting down with a Black man sitting down with a Black woman, you see that their struggle has been going on for so long that this tension could even stop a conversation from happening about, hey, I would like to see this change within you. And us as men, our egos, our pride, we're gotta be all big, bad, protective, tough. And it's just like inside we're very sensitive, just want love, just want a motherly hug and motherly love. And that's my experience as I try to make change in my own ways. When I talk to my aunts, when I talk to my daughter, I sit down and I ask them questions and I sit there and listen. And when I listen, I'm able to intentfully answer what it means to me and go out and be a better Black man in the world. So I think it is hard to sit down, but we have to address certain things that emotionally we have deep inside of us from trauma. Losing my mom, losing women in my life has never been an easy thing to get over. It's painful, especially when I think about unlawful governmental practices that have to do with breaking up my family. So there's been a specific target on women in my family that they didn't get a chance to grow up. They had to grow up at 16, 15 years old, have kids at a very young age, grow up in the projects, raise 6 kids, raise this family to be better, raise the women to be strong. Because usually in our communities, the man is out, woman is out, and if either one is out, then there's an imbalance there. So I would like to just talk about how does that exist when we sit down at the table with young Black men and women and older Black men and women first to bridge the gap. I'm 28. I don't know everything, but I will pretend like I do. I don't know, where to start sometimes, but I have questions. And these questions only lead to truth about where I come from and how I can be better as a Black man raising my daughter, but also with the Black queens that came before me, because they'll tell you straight up, such as Ms. Davis, Michelle Alexander. Listening to them speak, they speak with so much conviction because they've been in the fight for so long. They know what it feels to be shackled up here. They take the body, control the mind. I think these conversations need to happen a lot more, and probably have a counselor in between, because some of us do need therapy and help communicating effectively without feeling like someone's pressing you, attacking you, especially if it's your own family. Sometimes it could come from your sister, your dad. Hey, I want you to do this. You need to be more cognizant of how you help your people. You need to be doing this. It's like, no, I'm doing it my way. Hey, listen now. So I've kind of learned that aspect more or less during this fight, and turning back to my community more than ever for answers, because they're going to give it to me straight. Like, hey, you've been bugging out there. Reel it in.
And Jemele, I want to add to that, because thank you, Kyrie, for building on that. But I also, too, it's something he said that we don't think about as black men, why sometimes we act the way we do, and it does deal with trauma, and that's intergenerational trauma. Meaning, when you come take a man and like let's just get to the conditioning of slavery. You take a man and say, well, I'm gonna take your wife away, and you can't like sit up and be a man and like work and earn the things for your family and even protect your wife, because I'm gonna kill you here, I'm gonna take your children. Man, we fighting as men just to try to feel like what it is to be a man in a space. And then at a certain point, throughout years and centuries at this point, that type of trauma and inheriting that, and really trying to find who we are as men at that point, with all that we have, has been some of the issues. And then, fast forward to me growing up on the south side of Chicago, I'm taught to be a man is, okay, how many girls I got, get your money, okay, you be that guy, can you fight? The toughest dudes, they selling dope over, some of those things that just due to the case of systematic racism, we've been placed in that place, that spot. So to try to learn to be a man, you got to have some men that sit down too and say, hey man is about being a man is about love, and it's okay to express that love in to other people, to women, to uplift your women. It's okay to show that love in brotherhood, and it's okay at times just to be quiet and remove your ego and say, hey man, I'm not gonna go back and forth with you. Being able to say, man, I need a therapist. I gotta go talk to a therapist. I need it. Think about all the stigmas we got, Jemele, like you grew up in Detroit, like the stigmas that, I need this dude gotta be cool. Oh, he a player, he this. Man, if we talked about going to see a therapist, man, your homies would be going like, what's up? But now we moving past that. We moving forward. It's different leaders that's talked about therapy. It's different leaders that's talked about meditation. It's different leaders that's talking about love, and people that's in the spotlight, like a Kyrie that is achieving so much and has achieved so much, but is open to expressing themselves and being vulnerable and seeking out things and speaking out for something more than themselves. Those are things that we always don't see our heroes doing that all the time. So
I'm not calling you out, but you're a little bit older than Kyrie.
I'm 20 years old.
Okay, you're a little older than him. So you have seen this conversation between black men and black women, and us dealing with not just our intergenerational trauma, as you talked about, dealing with misogyny, dealing with a whole lot of issues with each other. Do you feel like, you mentioned where mental health was, like I definitely think we have moved the needle on that conversation in our community. Have we been able to move the needle at all on how black men can better support, love, protect, whatever you want to throw in there with black women? Have we moved the conversation about how we need to treat each other?
We haven't moved the needle enough. Let's say that. I think we start to have certain conversations, but it's not really that conversation of like truly being able to express yourself and listen. We haven't as black love and in relationships really cultivated our communication to the point where we can express things and it not be emotionally charged, and have to go back and forth, and really having that communication where it's like, man, you got to put it all out on the table. Like you got to say, the things that we can't operate in fear. We got to operate in faith, and putting that faith out there in communication is really important.
Kyrie, to bring it back to you, since you're speaking from another generation, what are these conversations like, or how would you describe them between Black men and Black women of your generation? Like, are Black men that you know of, do they understand the misogyny happening in our community? Do they understand about some of the intricacies and issues that are specific to Black women? Like, what are those conversations like with other men your age and other Black women your age when you talk about these issues?
I believe I'm in a very, very, very grateful, like a special space. I want to say I'm very grateful for the men and women I have in my life, because they've been able to afford me such a beautiful understanding of life and the way you treat other human beings. You know, I watch a lot of the men that I'm around, young men that we have kids, whether we're with our children's moms or not, we have responsibilities, we provide, we protect. You know, some of us have daughters, sons. It's the most beautiful thing to see is watching Black men take care of their responsibilities. And we're all cooking out, or we're all doing something, or we're all meeting, congregating, and talk about how we can improve one another. Now, I cannot say that those conversations are the same when I'm sitting down with the queens in my life, especially the special lady in my life, where I've learned she was raised to be psychologically independent. Emotionally, she is not in a space where she needs a man, but she knows what she wants. She knows what she needs in order to be a better version of herself, what serves her true purpose, what's going to make her bloom like a beautiful flower. And I really see it in that relationship in that sense now. Is I had to do some soul searching to really approach her in a way to be able to understand that even when she was telling me that, hey, let's have a conversation about how we better ourselves, I think that there are things that we can both understand more about each other. You know, I think I was raised to be psychologically dependent on people around me. And as a man, I think I was raised that way, to be a strong man, independent, but as well as I know I needed dependency in some other form or fashion for me to be self-confident. It took a while for me to step into that. Now, women, on the other hand, especially Black queens, they step into that very early. I can't say that there's always reassurance, because I have seen some queens where they come to us men to ask, especially Black men, to ask like, hey, what can I learn more about you and to understand you? But I don't think there are enough questions from us coming to Black women, unless it's a special woman in our life. We don't have these conversations with our friends, you know, or even as much as I would like to have these conversations. But when we're in a setting and we can talk openly, and that there isn't any type of attraction that would be outside of, we're sitting here to talk about improving one another, sitting here and actually having an intent, not just to hang out and, hey, we saw each other in this, like actually having an intent. I think that's the biggest thing that is driving me is, let's sit down and yeah, let's have a drink or two, but let's talk about the real life social climate and how we can be better moving forward, because our brotherhood, sisterhood, it doesn't really matter. We know the masculine and feminine, when they're balanced, it's a beauty in life. So you can't have one without the other. And as I've learned is you have to almost throw yourself in those uncomfortable conversations to really understand what a woman goes through on a day in and day out basis. They wake up every single day. Most of them want to be called beautiful. Some of them want to be pushed. Some of them don't want to be pushed. Some of them, and I don't want to speak in terms of a broader, like for every woman that I've met, but the special ones in my life, and also you, Jemele, as I've talked to you before the call, like I've witnessed you take a stance on something you believe in, and seeing women do that. We're natural admirers as Black men. We're like, man, if we had the guts like Nina Simone to come out with Mississippi Goddamn, we're watching our women stand in front like, we're tired of white people hanging Black people in trees. What are we going to do about that, people? And then other men jump to the forefront like, oh, Nina, Nina, Nina. That's the same route that I believe we need to employ now, is having those queens, having a council of strong Black queens that you can count on, that you can ask, and there's nothing else that they want to give you other than knowledge and truth of self. So as we refer back to even Breonna Taylor and her name, we have to shed light on her mom, on her younger sister that's going to be growing up, because this memory won't be going anywhere. This pain will exist within them, but the community that they come from, that we all belong to, will understand. And we will open them up with big arms, like, come on home. And we need to have that ecosystem where we do have our own therapists that we can depend on, that we do have our own lawyers in the criminal justice system that we can depend on, that we do have patrolling in our neighborhoods that represent us, not continuously not naming the elephant in the room. Like, it's there. It's there. Black women are disenfranchised. It's marginalized. We get it. Okay, they're going to continue to speak. Us men, let them do their job. Hey, how can we support? We need to elevate this. And when we do have a chance to speak on it, and I think I haven't done the job that I've wanted to do in my responsibility to speak up on these things, but now that I do, I'm here full and front force to be that voice, to be that platform, whatever is needed from me, to afford opportunities that I had access to just from being a Black man. They gave me opportunity just because I could put it in the hoop. I was like, oh, okay, this is nice. And then we're watching Black women be entrepreneurs and cosmetics lines, and we're watching their ecosystem build, and you guys are supporting each other through thick and thin because the struggle is real, and it wouldn't be a fight without our male and females being side by side. So that's the hope I have in all of this when I sit down and talk with people my age now, is like bringing up all these things in one fashion or another, and actually having these honest conversations on how we make change.
Along those same lines, comment, what I will ask you is what, as we continue to fight for justice for Breonna Taylor, we're on day 100 and something where there's still been no charges filed against the officers that have killed her. Do you see in the movement toward getting her justice, how much should men, or do you think men should really be at the forefront of this? I mean, we know what Black women have done in the Black Lives Matter movement and in this movement, but should it be intentional for Black men to lead the cause and lead the case for Breonna Taylor to receive justice?
I believe that we should be in balance with women who are leading, because women have already started the mission and brought a lot of attention. The sisters that we had on earlier, from Alicia Garza to Brittany Packnett to Dr. Brittany Cooper and of course Representative Ayanna Pressley. But then you also have Tamika Mallory with Until Freedom, and I've seen Rhapsody and Alicia Keys, and all these women are. So I think it's more about the balance of us sitting down and really saying, hey, we are here. We are here. How can we be used? These are some of the ideas that we have, and we just come in and be in connection with it, because ultimately we want to see justice served as far as these police officers getting arrested, but the true justice is like, it won't be any more Breonna Taylors. It won't be any more George Floyd's. It won't be, we have to create, I want to be a part of things that create a future where we don't see these things happening, and anybody that thinks they can get away with it will be punished. They will have, justice will be served to them. As men, I feel like we have something we got to step up, and we got to be right there. It's like locked arms. We there with you. And when the physical aspects come into it, we there in front of you, like that's what it should be. But as far as like just coming in, leading the way, no, women have too much to offer for us to say, let us lead this situation. I was listening to that conversation earlier with Alicia and the sisters earlier, and I was like just learning. So it's like I've been learning so much from our women that I would, it would behoove me to say, yo, let us just lead this situation. But I definitely feel that we have to be there as men in my age, men in Kyrie age, we have to be there. Our younger men, they need to see us. They need to see us. That's part of one of the things that with these conversations is like, I owe it to the next generations to actually like tell them my pitfalls, tell them the places where I've been successful, tell them the things I don't know, tell them the places where I can be like loving and I've been open and just be true to myself and make sure I pass that energy and information on to these new generations. And I think, that's what you're starting to see now. You see Kyrie taking time to focus on actually creating change, like putting his mind and his heart and his like body in towards that. I had to take that mantle at a certain point and be like, you know what? I'm known as this conscious artist. I'm doing some things, but I can do more. you know, and that's what, as men, we can do more.
So, Kyrie, what does Black men's involvement in pursuing justice for Breonna Taylor, what does that look like to you?
Justice for us Black men in terms of Breonna Taylor is more importantly getting those officers fired and arrested and prosecuted and seeing their justice. And that's really where I'm at. I don't really want to sit here and sugarcoat anything. Like, it was really like gut-wrenching to hear about that story. And like I said in the beginning of the call, to hear about all those unlawful practices. And I think that they're trying to get a bill passed as well, the Breonna Taylor law, and to make sure that like Common said, there aren't any more Breonna Taylors, like, or Sandra Bland's, or countless other women, especially in the last 3 years, that have lost their lives. Where's the right information so we can petition and we can protest and we can go in there and talk to the Attorney General, just like we're seeing now. And the fact that it has been 100 and something days and there still hasn't been any justice is still angering people. People are still showing up. I saw Common speaking there, as well as others posting continuously every single day, because Black lives matter, but this is more than a movement. This is a revolution that has been underground and now it's on top. And now we're all back around the way and all our information education is aligning. And now we're all starting to get this machine going to do our parts individually, and then coming to the collective with your ego down and knowing like, here, I'm here to learn and how can I help? So I think justice can exist in many different ways. But specifically for me, it's doing my part, not just being this 6-time NBA All-Star, or this NBA champion, or everything that I identified with of what I thought my legacy was going to be about. This has taken a whole new turn. My interest has shifted not just to Breonna Taylor, but what's going on in the WNBA, what's going on with our Black sisters there. They're going down to, they have injustice going on there in their work practice. They have things going on. So I was completely not aware of how many of our sisters actually have the same competitive drive that I do, but don't get the same opportunity or same justice on their end. You know, they're producing life and they have to go overseas and they can only play over here. So these language, you know, injustices as well against women exist, not just in my industry, but all over. And we can say it's fair and everyone say, hey, we're doing the best for the players, but we're looking at women having to make hard life choices based upon survival. And to see our Black queens in survival mode is like, I've been there. I've seen people in my family deal with that. So there's a bigger picture out here for me to utilize what I've done in my career, not just basketball, but as a man. You know, when I sit down and talk with, you know, Natasha Cloud, or I sit down and chop it up with Renee Montgomery, and I hear about them and what they're doing to fight against social reform and social injustice. They are at the front lines. They're schooling me like, hey, look, we want you to do this, this, this. And I'm like, okay, I'm there. Count me in. That's all we need to hear is like, hey, I'm going to be there and I'm going to be present for you and I'm going to show up. I think that that's where I'm at, is with my 24 hours not being dedicated to thinking about how many plays or how many baskets I'm making or what's going on in terms of who I'm competing with. And it's like I finally had a chance to liberate myself to see exactly what was going on in the world and how our Black women can be so supported until I'm not on this earth anymore. That's my duty. That's my purpose. Basketball is a great vehicle to be able to have the means to get a lot of capital. But even when you think about the capital in that sense, the WNBA is getting 400% less and making do. I put it in simple perspectives like that. I'm okay. Like, my family is okay. I've done my job as a Black man to educate myself now. So what am I going to do with it? Take it to the streets, get the grassroots, get all of our Black supporters, all our community, and really start talking about what change looks like. But also, we can't have this moment without talking about the indigenous liberation movement as well, which is the Native Americans that existed here before, I don't want to say before Black and Africans came here, but there's always been a fight for what human rights and human conditions look like for colored people. What I want to do now is not only be a part of the responsibility of bringing justice for Breonna Taylor, but also for different industries and how my responsibility to make change as well and listen to how, hey, these unfair practices exist, not just in the police department, they exist in the corporate world for a lot of our women not getting a lot of the executive roles. We're talking about, hey, we want more black men in executive roles in the NBA. We want this over here. We want this. No, we need more female black executives running so the trickle-down effect starts to happen. So opportunities start to open up for employment. So there's less things happening in our community and we have more entrepreneurial spirited people that not only can speak on it, but actually are doers. It's one thing, and one thing I've noticed about this, it's great to talk about, hey, these ideas, we need to change for our community, but then it's another thing to speak on the behalf and then go out and put in the work daily. Like my days were swamped with hours trying to think about how I can master this craft of basketball, and now it's like, I wonder what my life will look like when I discipline myself to educate myself on what this fight truly is and how my purpose can be aligned with my black queens being the leaders for the future. I know my daughter Azori Elizabeth was meant to be a leader of a revolution, but more or less an evolution. And you don't have evolution, and as many people think in evolution, there's love. So at the end of it, it's like continuing to pour love into our black queens as much as I can.
You mentioned the law with Breonna Taylor, and it was passed, the no-knock warrant, because that was at the center of how this gross incompetence did happen related to her death. Kyrie mentioned a few things, comment that I'd like to get your, response to. Real quick, I'll also say, I always remind people when it comes to the WNBA players that before Colin Kaepernick started his protest in the NFL, the Minnesota Lynx put themselves out on the line by wearing T-shirts speaking about police brutality in response to what happened to Philando Castile. And the Minnesota police walked off their post because they chose to take that stand. So they engineered a lot of the protest among athletes that you see. And even now you brought up Natasha Cloud and Renee. They're giving up their careers in which, Kyrie pointed out the money disparity, where they do not have the income, the same flow of income that NBA players have. And they're choosing to give up that part of their livelihoods anyway to join this fight for injustice. So we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge and give context to what that means when you see WNBA players choosing not to play in the WNBA this season. It is very much a big deal. And Maya Moore, one of the best to ever do it, gave up her whole career to fight for injustice, in particular to get a young man free. But piggybacking off of something that Kyrie said, because what he was really talking about was hope, and hoping that the future for his daughter, for your daughter, Common, will look a lot different than what the present looks like for us. In these moments of, it's a lot of unrest, we're clearly having conversations, trying to move forward, trying to plan, trying to strategize, mobilize. What is it that gives you the most hope right now that this won't be a problem we pass along to the next generation or generations after that?
The energy and the commitment of young people, like how they out there. I'm inspired by them. I literally went out to the protest because some people I work with who were my age, way younger than me, was like, we going to the protest. And I was like, damn, I need to be going to the protest, and I got out there and I felt inspired. I felt it was, as much as it was hurt and pain, I felt like a unified front of people who wanted a better world, and they were willing to do whatever it takes on a good side. And I'm hopeful because there's so many people who are intelligent and really caring and loving, like as Kyrie spoke about with the revolution is love. Like Asada was talking about revolution takes love, and even Dr. Angela Davis said it. So I'm hopeful in the fact that these people, the people who are out right now, who are just doing what we do, Jemele, people who are fighting for justice, whether it's through organizations or just saying, man, I want to do something to help this world. I feel like we're not gonna stop. I feel like we see that this is the opportunity that we really have to actually change the world, and we have the resources now. Like, we have the support systems in ways that's like, man, you got people that support this with you, Jemele, like, for real, like, and so, I mean, I ain't trying to bring up the stuff that happened with organizations like that you've worked with before and things like that. I think it's more of a unified front now that those things they will be held more accountable, and those things won't be able to happen with, I don't think, anymore. And that's just even where we are now. It's riper now than it was ever before. And I say that because too, our elders have said it. I've heard President Obama say, like, hey, I've seen, I grew up watching the marches during the civil rights time, and he's like, it's a different time. Obviously what they done was incredible, and like, this is the reason why we can go out and do this. But now we have the young people, we have multicultural, we have all these different people who are like actually truly understanding what it means to be in the struggle of Black people. And even if they don't understand it in our shoes, they care enough to say, I'm gonna go out and step out and do some things too.
Ultimately, what we've talked a lot about in this entire conversation is liberation. And everybody has a different idea in our community about what that liberation looks like. But in thinking about it from a big picture standpoint, and even from a nuanced standpoint, Kyrie, can we even begin to achieve liberation or talk about liberation unless we have meaningful, not just conversations, but a meaningful agenda specifically for Black women?
It's so hard to answer that question with just one answer. So I'm going to do my best to get down to the points. Liberation looks different for everyone, like you said. And I think what I've learned throughout kind of my life is there have been so many attempts of, one person being the leader of, like, look, what's the agenda? What's the agenda? What is everyone going to agree to? And I think just having a general perspective on where Black women's value is, it will always stay in our community. That needs to be part of our principle list that we live by no matter what. A lot of things that separate me from other people that I meet is simple principle list. It's not anything outside of that. It's just my core principles that I'm developing every single day. And I think as I think about the queens in my life, that is always keeping it in perspective. What I would like to see is more community efforts to bridge the gap, not only through capital, but just socially. If we're going to say we're going to invest in a particular project that is for our Black queens, or is for young Black queens that are growing up and we're raising them and they are in environments that are safe and they are aware of the dangers out there of just being a woman in general, but they are also able to articulate what they mean and have the team behind them to go out and do it for them. We see a lot of young women that start from the ground up and they build a whole entire empire and they're independent and they're doing it themselves and they're in competition with other men, like other Black men. For what? Why are we competing with our Black women, even if their stories don't match ours or anything like that? They're a Black queen, they made it. Look, how can I adjust my frame of thinking to be an ally for you, a brother to you? So I don't think it's one particular answer how we go about it, but our Black women need to be able to lead that space and be able to do it in numbers. I don't mind personally putting down my personal opinion on things if it means it's better for the collective, especially when we're talking about the queens. I'm always going to call them queens because we are running a kingdom present day. This is just taking the time to build our Wakanda all across America. So we have the technology up front. So we have the social issues that we've already dismissed in our own community, because I think it's hard not to address a lot of the abuse that can happen in a woman's life that could deter her from doing things because a male in her life did something that was effed up and she didn't recover and she was never the same queen again. I don't like stories like that, and I don't like seeing young women like that. I don't like seeing older women like that, especially when I say us men need a hug. women need to be protected and shielded as well from the dangers that exist of being a Black woman out here. The way they have to move, the way our queens have to move is just so isolated, sometimes secluded, because they have a distrust for what's going on. I've been around enough young Black queens to know that this is the sentiment. Hey, you guys are here when it serves you. You men are there when it serves you and what your purpose is. As soon as we say we want to do something and we have your back, then you go out and get another woman from another race. For what? I don't think that I'm going to make it a racial thing, but it is a barrier that exists between us psychologically as men, depending on our Black queens to give us what we need. So I would like to see us be more strengthened in numbers, and especially with my own practices in my own life. You know, my foundation that I maybe started combining and getting all the pieces together has 7 Black women running it. 7. I'm like, let's get 20. Like, I feel like for me, they're always going to keep it real. There is no room for BS between, hey, Kai, you said you were going to do that, right? Okay, they hold me accountable in a way that I know I can be my best self. I can smile. I know that I can be sensitive and free. They're going to laugh with me, and they're also going to laugh at me. They're going to tell me the truth all over again every day I wake up, and I get to be a part of them raising their kings and actually have something to do with shaping their lives and being myself. You know, that's the best thing about this whole life as I've just come into my awakening, as you mentioned, Jemele, was, all right, here's what success looked like for me when I was in 4th grade, thinking like, this is what I want my life to be. And then at 28, let me get my sister involved with Nike. Let me get her involved. Her shoe is coming out, and I let her just take my whole canvas of a shoe. It was the first time in Nike's history where it was a brother-sister tandem, but I'm pretty sure it's the first time in Nike history where a Black brother and sister came together and combined and did something that has capital consequences if we don't do it well. And the trust that I have in my sister is elevating her to go out, hey, Age, like, yeah, this is on your resume. I'm happy that I could do this. I'm happy I could be partnering with you. And I have so many examples, such as like Jewel Lloyd. You know, we lose a mentor in Kobe. And, you know, a lot of people lost Kobe as a mentor. God rest his soul. I miss him daily. But what he was doing for the W really inspired me to continue to carry that torch. So I'm creating opportunities, whether it is in management or in agencies, or whether it is in, you know, what we like to think in the capital world of deals. You know, like, how can I invest my money with the W? You know, how can I start a fund that supplements a lot of the WNBA salaries if they so choose to fight for social reform? Because I do understand that this financial game is built on racism and capitalism. It's one or the other. You can't have one without the other. And then you think in the gender roles, I would like to be partnered up with so many other greats that believe in that alignment and go out and do it. So,
well, thank you, gentlemen, for providing so much thought, so much substance, and for most importantly, for showing a lot of Black women who are watching this how much you care and value them, and how committed you are to finding justice for Breonna Taylor. My one bit of advice as the Black woman representing on this panel is always find a space or give space or room so that Black women can be vulnerable with you, because that's the one thing we don't get to be. We have the weight of the weight of the world is always on our shoulders. We out here trying to save everybody, Wakanda, America, everybody, right? And we have very few spaces where we can feel vulnerable. And I know a lot of us in conversations I've had with my friends, conversations I've had with elders in my family, is that was the piece and the component that was often missing in relationships that they had with men, be they romantic partners or just friends, is us not feeling that we can be vulnerable with you. So you provide that space for a woman, and you'd be surprised at how much mentally you can ease just from her life, and how much pressure you can relieve from everything that she's going through. So thank you, gentlemen. I know with you two kings, we're in good hands, and I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure everybody watching will appreciate it too.
I am Tamika Palmer. I am the mother of Breonna Taylor.
Three officers on the Louisville Metro Police Department used a battering ram to knock down her door. They fired 22 times, 8 of those bullets landed in the body of the most essential worker I will ever know. Bree was murdered by the Louisville Metro Police Department, and after they killed her, they asked me if she had any enemies. No, absolutely not.
This story started coming out differently, and people started learning the truth of what was happening and the things that went wrong that night. Now the whole city is mad. Now the whole world is mad. Brianna should not be dead. Some days I feel like I can't breathe without her. This should never happen to another family. I am Breonna Taylor's mother. Say her name.
Now that we know what happened to Breonna Taylor, it is time for us to act and to get justice for her and her family. There are a few things that you can do no matter where you are in this country. The first thing is call Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher and demand that he fired the officers responsible for murdering Breonna Taylor. Number 2, call the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron and demand that he charge the officers who are responsible for murdering Breonna Taylor. Next, call the interim police chief, Robert Schroeder, and tell him to finish his investigation and immediately turn over the details to Breonna's lawyers and also to the attorney general. And now, Louisville residents, the power is in your hands. Breonna Taylor's family has said that they are not just fighting for her, but they're fighting to ensure that what happened to Breonna never happens again. There's a vote in your town this week. Call your council members and let them know that you demand that they vote to ban no-knock warrants.
Do you know what happened to Breonna Taylor? Do you know what happened to Breonna Taylor?
I stand up for black women because it's a black woman who told me to say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Say her name. And now I say her name, Breonna Taylor.
Unjust justice system. We're tired of empty promises with no progress and no change.
We come in all colors, black, brown, tan, a variety. I'm tired of people trying me. Police always eyeing me, we all brothers. It ain't no menace to society, ain't blocking out no post for notoriety. Tried taking the knee, but now we marching right in they doors. What the fuck is you quiet for? I get it why they looting, now you see why we ride for 300 plus years, I be damned if we go through more. Can't calculate our damage cause the pain wasn't insured. They better make sure that they know what they in for. It's Black Lives Matter, fuck we gotta convince for. They point the 9 at 12, got them yelling out 10-4. Still 99 problems, I just wish I could vent more.